If you follow women's basketball even a little bit, you've probably noticed something interesting happening over the last year. For so long, almost every conversation about the future of the game seemed to start and end with one name, Caitlin Clark. But slowly, quietly, another name has been climbing into that same spotlight in a very different way, Paige Bueckers. And what's really fascinating is that this shift isn't about who's better between the lines, it's about how each of them chooses to live out the role of superstar in the WNBA era and how that shapes the way the entire sport is seen. Paige Bueckers has been treated like a future pro since she was still a teenager cooking people at the high school level. By the time she was winning awards at UConn, you didn't need a scouting report to know what she was. A point guard with elite feel, vision, and poise. Someone who made the game look easy even when it absolutely wasn't. From very early on, people put her and Caitlin Clark in the same bucket. Generational guards who see things 2 beats before everyone else. Their games aren't identical. Clark built her brand on deep-range shooting, audacious pull-ups from the logo, and the kind of scoring explosions that break scoreboards and social media in the same night. Bueckers is more of a surgical operator, smooth, balanced, deadly efficient, with a passing instinct that makes her teammates better possession by possession. But from a distance, they've always been linked. 2 faces of a new generation. 2 players you could build a franchise and a marketing push around. For a huge number of fans, especially people only recently tuning into women's basketball, Caitlin Clark became the symbol of what was possible. She was framed as the player who would change everything, how the game is played, how it's talked about, and how women's hoops is treated commercially. And honestly, on a lot of levels, she delivered. Once she arrived in the WNBA with the Indiana Fever, the numbers spoke loudly. Attendance soared in every arena she touched. Road games sold out. Viewership shattered records again and again. Sponsorships piled up. People who had never watched a WNBA game before were suddenly arguing about offensive schemes and flagrant fouls on weeknight nights. That's the Caitlin Clark effect everyone talks about, the measurable spike in interest that clearly tracks back to her presence. But here's where things start to get more complicated and where Paige Bueckers enters the picture in a bigger way. Being a superstar in 2026 isn't just about what you do from tip-off to the final buzzer. The modern athlete lives in a 12-month cycle. The season shapes your legacy, but the off-season shapes your brand. That's where fans who don't live in your city still feel connected to you. It's where you hold on to casual supporters who discovered you in the playoffs or at a marquee game. It's where you take the interest you've created and turn it into something consistent, a presence, not just a moment. And this is where the contrast between Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers really shows. Caitlin Clark is absolutely everywhere when the ball is in her hands. Once the season ends, she tends to do the opposite. She steps back. She's not flooding social feeds with daily content. She's not popping up in every off-season event, and she's not trying to be an always-on celebrity. She checks out, recharges, lives her life. There's nothing wrong with that at all on a personal level. In fact, it probably keeps her sane. But when fans and media had already pre-written a superstar script for her, one that assumed she'd be as visible in July and December as she is in June, that quieter off-season approach started to feel, to some people, like a gap. Not on the court, in the narrative. They expected a non-stop cultural presence and got a more selective one instead. But Paige Bueckers has leaned into that 12-month model in a way that feels very intentional. As a guard for the Dallas Wings, she's been building her WNBA resume in the traditional way, performances, wins, highlights, but she's also become more and more savvy about the other part of the job, being out there. During the months when some stars vanish from the public eye, Bueckers stays active. She engages with what her generation is watching and talking about. She doesn't disappear when the regular season ends. She simply changes stages. One of the biggest examples of that is the Unrivaled League. In its first season, Unrivaled immediately became the place to look if you wanted to see high-level women's basketball in an off-season setting that actually centered the players. It wasn't some half-speed, no-stakes run. It was fun, competitive, well-packaged, and very intentionally designed as a product for this era.
Paige didn't just show up, play a few games, and bounce. She became the focal point. If you followed unrivaled highlights, her name and face were everywhere. The league clearly treated her as one of its core attractions, and she delivered. Angel Reese also used Unrivaled to stay in front of fans, build out her own image, and keep momentum between WNBA campaigns. But because Caitlin Clark chose not to participate, not in year one, and again not in the second season, there was an obvious vacuum in terms of off-season superstar presence. Paige Bueckers slid right into that empty space, and not by accident. While Clark's side of the spotlight dimmed in the off-season by choice, Bueckers made sure hers got brighter. Not in a forced, look-at-me way, but through consistent appearances, content, and competition. She stayed attached to the game in a way that felt modern and constant. For a fan base now trained to expect constant access, that matters. When the WNBA isn't playing, but your favorite players are still on your screen, it keeps the league in the conversation. It makes sponsors happier. It helps carve out space in a very crowded sports calendar. Paige understands that. So does Angel Reese. They both treat visibility not as a bonus, but as part of the job. Caitlin Clark, by contrast, has drawn a clearer line. Once the schedule stops, she doesn't seem overly interested in filling every gap with content or appearances. If you're waiting for her to become a Kardashian-style figure who dominates gossip sites and TikTok trends 365 days a year, that's not who she's trying to be. She appears to want her influence to run primarily through what she does in an actual game jersey. That's the key distinction here. It's not that Caitlin can't live up to the off-court superstar script people wrote for her. It's that she doesn't fully buy into that script in the first place. Paige does, or at least she's far more willing to play within it. So when people say Paige Bueckers is stepping into the superstar role Caitlin Clark was supposed to have, they're not talking about impact in season. They're talking about everything else. Paige is rising into that face of the conversation position in the months when Caitlin steps away. But that doesn't mean this is some rivalry that has to end with a winner and a loser.
One of the problems in how women's sports gets covered is that the spotlight is still too small. A lot of people instinctively default to either-or thinking. If one woman is thriving, the other must be slipping. Clark versus Bueckers, Bueckers versus Reese. Whose league is it? Who's the real star? What this situation actually proves is something healthier. There is more than one way to move the needle, and the WNBA needs all of them. Caitlin Clark brings in casual sports fans, network executives, sponsors, and headlines in a way we haven't seen in a long time. Her games feel like events. Her highlights cut through the noise even in a stacked sports day. That kind of generational talent and draw is never a bad thing. Paige Bueckers brings a different energy. She feels like the prototype of the new age, all-year-round professional, active in off-season leagues, present on social platforms, in tune with younger fans, and very comfortable making her career part of a constant content stream. That helps in a different way. It keeps women's basketball from having dead zones on the cultural calendar. Angel Reese adds yet another version. Unapologetic personality, visibility across fashion and culture, and a willingness to play at all levels and in all settings. There's room for all of it. This is especially important when you zoom out and look at where the WNBA is structurally. Because while we all love to break down who's getting more views and who trends more in a given week, there's a much bigger conversation happening underneath all of this about money, power, and fairness. Right now, the WNBA salaries and revenue sharing are nowhere near where they should be for a league with this level of talent and this much untapped demand. Players reportedly receive less than 7% of league revenue. Compare that to the NBA, where the split is essentially around 50-50 between players and owners. That gap tells you everything you need to know about why stars are playing year-round, heading overseas or into extra leagues, and still fighting for basic equity. When you put that into context, pitting Paige Bueckers and Caitlin Clark against each other, as if there's only room for one face of the league, starts to look counterproductive. The real fight isn't over who gets more likes in February, it's over how to leverage this unprecedented wave of attention into better deals, better working conditions, safer travel, bigger contracts, and a more sustainable ecosystem for everyone. Caitlin Clark driving record ratings helps in that fight. Paige Bueckers being hyper-relevant in the offseason helps. Angel Reese staying at the center of conversation helps. Veterans who've been carrying this league for years on lower salaries help. This is not a zero-sum game. The more names the average fan knows, the stronger the union's negotiating position becomes. So yes, it is fair and interesting to point out that Paige is stepping up in areas where Caitlyn has, so far, chosen not to lean all the way in. If you're looking at the modern definition of superstar, on-court dominance plus off-court omnipresence, Bueckers is checking a lot of those boxes very deliberately. She's embracing that role in Unrivaled, with the Dallas Wings, and in the broader cultural space. But that doesn't mean Clark has failed at anything. It may simply mean that her personal boundaries and priorities are different. Some players are wired to live in front of the camera 12 months a year, others are not. The key is that the WNBA's infrastructure, marketing, and media coverage are flexible enough to accommodate both types and still push the game forward. In an ideal world, this is how it plays out over the next few years. Caitlin Clark continues to torch defenses, fill arenas, and stretch the geometry of the game in ways that make even casual fans stop and stare. Paige Bueckers keeps building her case as one of the smoothest, most smartest guards of her generation, while also being one of the most visible faces of women's basketball when the WNBA is technically off. Angel Reese keeps dominating the conversation in her own lane and setting trends on and off the court. Other stars from established franchises and newer markets do the same. Together, they create so much noise, so much consistent attention, that conversations about revenue sharing, charter flights, salary caps, and expansion can't be brushed aside anymore. Instead of being framed as rivals, they're framed as a collective front. Different personalities, different brands, same goal: making sure the next generation of players doesn't have to choose between chasing legacy and chasing a livable paycheck. So when you see people trying to stir up drama by saying Paige is taking Caitlyn's crown, it's worth taking a breath. What's actually happening is more nuanced and, honestly, more exciting. The women's game isn't built around a single queen. It's evolving into a full royal court. Paige Bueckers is learning how to occupy that space all year long. Caitlin Clark is redefining what's possible between the lines during the season. Both roles are essential, both are powerful, and if the WNBA can harness both instead of forcing fans to pick sides, the league will be in a much stronger position to demand the respect and the revenue it has earned many times over.